Going to be 13.4, the New Deal expands. Of course, just like in the last few, we are going to be focusing not on the New Deal programs, as that's going to be part of your in-class presentation assignment. So we are going to start with a song written by Walter Troen of the Chicago Tribune, making fun of what he called the alphabet soup of the New Deal, all these programs that FDR was trying to do. And so it goes a little something like this. My country, 'tis of the sweet land of liberty, FDIC. AAANRACCCRFC PWAWPAHOLC. And that's the last time you're ever going to hear me sing. All right, our objectives. We are going to analyze ways that the New Deal promoted social and economic reform and its long-term effects. We are going to explain how the New Deal legislation affected the growth of organized labor, and we're going to evaluate the impact of Roosevelt's plan to increase the number of U.S. Supreme Court justices on the course of the New Deal. So, this is a lot to get through. Let's get started. Now, during this time period, we see that the New Deal sort of went for a while and then stopped for a while and then sort of revved up again. Usually, if you look at the New Deal, there's what's called the first New Deal and then the second New Deal as well, where it sort of picks up again where it stopped for a little while. We'll continue looking at them through our homework, but most of them were very expensive, and that's an important thing. Having the New Deal work meant that the federal government was going to have to pay a lot of money to make it work. But Roosevelt believed that this was necessary. He was following what is called Keynesian economics, named after John Maynard Keynes, who was a British economist, who felt that in order to get the economy working, you needed to put money in before you got money out. You couldn't just assume that the economy would start flowing. Basically, he almost thought of it like a water pump, where you have to dump water into the pump in order to get the pump pushing water, and then it could keep pushing water after that. So in order to get things going, you needed to dump money into the pump, and then money would eventually keep flowing as you did it. And so Keynes and FDR called this pump priming. So here is a political cartoon showing that in order to get money out, you needed to put money in first. And that's the way it worked. So here is John Maynard Keynes, who once said, "Capitalism is the extraordinary belief that the nastiest of men, for the nastiest of reasons, will somehow work for the benefit of us all." Apparently, he had a bit of a dim view of capitalism. Now, a lot of people in the New Deal programs were benefiting unions at that time. Unions were getting helped, and we'll see that in our homework that the Labor Bureau was getting helped during this time. But there was also a new group that came out that was sort of frustrated with the old AFL, the American Federation of Labor. And it was a bunch of different labor unions all working together sort of under the umbrella of one called the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO. They were mainly lower paid, more ethnically diverse labor unions working with African Americans and immigrants and unskilled laborers and things like that. And they would go in, and one of their tactics would be they would go to work, they would show up to work, and then they would sit down and do nothing. So it's really hard to like work around them. So these were called sit down strikes. They refused to work at their place of business. So here are a bunch of workers at a GM manufacturing factory on what's called a sit down strike in 1936. Now, we've also seen a little bit of opposition to the New Deal that would increase during this time. Not all the New Deal programs were shown to be constitutional, or at least the Supreme Court thought they weren't constitutional. And Roosevelt was really annoyed that the Supreme Court kept trying to block his New Deal programs. He felt that it was just almost out of spite. And so he said, you know what? I'm tired of these guys blocking my stuff. I'm just going to fill the court with more Supreme Court justices, all of whom are going to, agree with me. And he came up with what is called his court packing plan, where he said, I'm going to put 15 Supreme Court justices on the bench instead of 9, and that means I get to choose 6 right away. Now, this was a horrible misstep by Roosevelt. Democrats hated it, Republicans hated it, the Supreme Court hated it, the public hated this idea. It seemed very dictatorial, very monarchical, very much like he was being a dictator in this certain way. However, even though he ended up backing off, a lot of the Supreme Court justices sort of felt the looming danger of, their jobs were in the line here. And so a lot of them decided it was time to retire, or at least time to start working with Roosevelt. So basically, here's a political cartoon with Roosevelt packing the court with more Roosevelts. Now, by 1935, the economy had begun to improve slightly, and then it went back up, and then it went back down again. The unemployment was rising and falling. It unfortunately for Roosevelt rose right before the congressional elections of 1938. The Democrats kept power, but it was a very thin margin, and his power was very weak. And so by this time, events in Europe were starting to focus more of his attention on Europe and Asia. We'll see more of this in the next chapter, that basically, over time, Roosevelt stopped worrying about the New Deal and the Great Depression and started worrying about the growing war in Europe more. And we'll see that this, basically World War II ended the New Deal. It also ended the Great Depression, as we're going to see.